You're a
I
Tulsa native.
am.
You're an Okie. You went to Earl Roberts University. And let me ask you, Tulsa, the city, in New York City, I guess, and Bill, you could opine on this. Our patron rock and roll saints are obviously the Ramones, Lou Reed, Patti Smith. Does Leon Russell have that reverence in Tulsa?
He does. Lee is so popular here.
Mhm.
Just look at the murals throughout our city. There are
Interesting.
dozens with Leon Russell on them, and of course J.J. Kell as well. But we're really proud of what Leon did, and that magical time period when he was
Mm,
here in the 1970s. I mean, he was really the musician's musician, so
sure.
everyone descended upon Tulsa during that time frame. I mean, you have people like Bonnie Raitt that moved to Tulsa. But it really was the who's who. And I think he had that magnetism about him.
Right. That is a fascinating story. And Bill, this is a book that had to be written. And Teresa, this is an American landmark that had to be recognized. So it's great that these two things came together, because as I'm reading the book, and David, the book for our audience member is Leon Russell, The Master of Space and Time's Journey Through Rock and Roll History. I'm reading this backwards. But yeah, I mean, I was thrilled to learn that the church existed. And Bill, what inspired you to write this book? Now we're all the same age. You must have remembered Leon Russell the first time around.
Yeah, sort of. My entry to Leon Russell was the Mad Dogs and Englishmen record when I was about
Right.
12 or 13 years old. I was the oldest of five, so I didn't have the benefit. And my parents were not hip, but they had some good records, but they were not hippies. Elvis Presley was as edgy as they got.
Bill, parents aren't supposed to like rock and roll. That's the way we grew up.
Well, we were sort of borderline. My parents were born the same year as Leon Russell, so
Oh, okay.
yeah, 42. So, but I formed a band at age 12 or 13, and this bass player in my band, who also was the oldest, he had really eclectic taste, and he had, among other, like Fusion and Zappa and Allman Brothers and Dead records, he had Mad Dogs and Englishmen somehow. And to me, that was like, it was one of those keys to the universe type records. It is everything I loved about rock and roll and sort of still do. So if you've got Exile on Main Street, my first book I wrote, it's all about that gospel piano kind of influence on the Stones. And it really came from Leon, and his helm as sort of one of the keystone guys in Delaney and Bonnie and Friends, Mad Dogs and Englishmen, onto Concerts for Bangladesh and all his solo stuff. That is like a magical era of rock and roll to me, like from 68 to 74 is just killer. And Leon was at the forefront. He was arguably the biggest concert grossing guy. His tours were among the most successful, let's put it that way, worldwide in that era.
Yeah. Now, Teresa, was that just, I mean, it was exotic to the rest of us. And David, I came to Mad Dogs and Englishmen and Leon in 1972.
I'm going to let you opine for a couple of minutes, then I'll.
But was that, I mean, Teresa, was that, I mean, the music was exotic to the rest of us, but was that just pretty much the way people sounded and played in Oklahoma back then? And today?
I think so. A lot of people think that there's something in the soil. Of course, this was native land. We only became a state in 1907.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think people got used to seeing Leon and other celebrities, Eric Clapton, around town during that time period. But, Oklahomans have a lot of pride in our musical heritage, and Leon really is at the center of that. So, I mean, it was neat growing up here, listening to the radio. The DJs would, say from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and list all of these amazing musicians and just the sheer number of drummers that came out of our community, like Jim Keltner and Jamie Oldacre and David Teagarden and Jimmy Karstein and Chuck Blackwell. I mean, it's just extraordinary. Of course, they tagged along with Leon. They were the shelter people.
Sure.
And so a lot of them were on the Mad Dogs and Englishmen tour. And of course, in 71 for a concert for Bangladesh.
Right.
Yeah, one of the Teresa raised a really interesting point, and people from Tulsa know this, that a lot of people ask what the Tulsa sound is, because there was this and they're really, it's hard to say there was when I think of if there is a Tulsa sound, it was the sort of groove, you know, like J.J. Cale had that laid back groove. But even when they were rocking like sort of full tilt like Leon, it was always about trying to find that guy with the pocket. So I had the benefit of getting a guided tour around Tulsa before he passed away by the late great Jimmy Karstein, who was one of the lesser known but killer drummers as well. He played behind JJ, played behind Joe Cocker. He was at the Rainbow concert for Clapton. I mean, and a lot of this had to do with Al Jackson Jr. and the Marquis and those guys coming up from Memphis, and Ronnie Hawkins with a young drummer named Levon Helm at that point. All these guys in Tulsa were really influenced by that style of pocket drumming.
Yeah, yeah.
What I was going to say is, having grown up in Manhattan, I think we took things a little bit more for granted, meaning I would take the subway down to the Fillmore, and for $2 or $3, I was guaranteed an incredible show of a number of different artists. So personally, I never really thought of regionalisms. I said, oh, these guys sound this way because they're from here. And it wasn't until later on that I, oh, that's the Memphis sound, that's Motown, that's this, that, and the other thing. And Bill, I got to tell you, the book is fascinating. And it's interesting, I'm sure you have, but this morning I put on Mad Dogs and Englishmen specifically to jump the timeline, as it were. And, being older, et cetera, and so on, you look at things a little differently. And that album is really incredible, It's not just, it's another live album, Allman Brothers at the Fillmore, things like that. It really is incredible. And you articulating Leon's arranging talent and conducting talent, getting through that chapter or chapters of the book, and then listening to it, you go, he's right,
Well, when you have Herb Alpert, and as I was fortunate among my many interviews to have, talking about like how Leon opened his eyes to rock and roll. Like he was kind of like a dyed-in-the-wool jazzer and sort of bossa nova dude and great stuff, but he's like, he went in there with his eyes closed and could feel that room when they were rehearsing at A&M's on the A&M lot levitating.
Wow.
And he opened it up, and there was this group of, of slovenly hippies, basically. And here's Herb Alpert in his probably in his nice tailored, shirt and everything. And he's like,
yeah. Well, it's interesting you brought that up, because when you think about A&M from the beginning, Spooky Tooth, Humble Pie, Fairport Convention. I mean, these were not your standard, until obviously Live at the Fillmore, bands. They weren't your normal fare. And you would think that he and Jerry Moss, had the foresight, and not only the foresight, but they gave these people money to sort of grow their career, something that nowadays would never happen.
I had somebody ask me yesterday about Stuart Margolin, who passed away recently, an actor from the Rockford Files and more. But he was also a musician, and he was in the scene with Leon and up at his Sky Hill house with the Asylum Choir, and he was on the Asylum Choir record. Yeah. But he had an office at A&M as a songwriter. Like those guys really fostered songwriting and that sort of old school record business stuff. They were an independent label, so it's hard to remember when they were like the underdog, but that's how these guys all started.
Yeah, exactly. Really, it brought that home to me. Very, very interesting. And my sister wrote songs for the Brooklyn Bridge, and she was a real bubblegum writer. Yeah, exactly. Back in the 60s, Paul Lecca was her writing partner, the guy who did Green Tambourine. So for me, I was meeting a lot of these people through her when before I could actually play. Some people wonder if I can now, but
you can play.
But it's very interesting. And for me, I think that so far the big revelation for me Leon Russell was in Paul Revere in the Raiders. I mean, how much more bizarre could it be, right?
Yeah, he was there for. I mean, Mark Lindsay attributes his coming out of his shell to Leon Russell, because Leon had seen it with Jerry Lee Lewis.
Yes, right.
You got to take the audience by the throat, basically, and from that point on, Mark Lindsay was going around with a long mic cable to go out into the stage, into the audience. And things. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, because Tom and I just did a show on Burt Bacharach, and you know, when you're listening to Jimi Hendrix and things like that, you're not really spending much time listening to Burt Bacharach. However, when the Elvis Costello Burt Bacharach record came out, it amazed me how, wow, that's that same trumpet sound, that's the same this, that's the same that. And you're right, that Harper's Bazaar song would be something my sister would have written. That kind of Peppermint Rainbow, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. But now, after reading the book and going, I gotta listen to that, listen to this, it's really remarkable. It really is. You know, as schmaltzy as it is.
Well, I mean,
there's a Tulsa word.
Those records would maybe go by you as, like I say, it's sort of a bubble of froth or whatever. But when you actually listen, to what's going on there and go, man, that's a room full of musicians, the top musicians in the world, some of them, all playing this thing that Leon wrote out like the day before, and listen to the sound of the room. And you guys as musicians, and Teresa as a studio owner, you appreciate the acoustics and what's going on, especially back then when it was all recorded live, you know, with just a couple of tracks left for vocals maybe. So it's a remarkable accomplishment as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Wow. You know, it says in the book, you know, what an influence that Mad Dogs and Englishmen was on a couple of artists. One of them, I think, just for my ears, was George Harrison's Dark Horse tour, was certainly, and his only tour was certainly born of Mad Dogs and Englishmen. We hear Bruce Springsteen saying that, you know, certainly that was an influence on the E Street Band. Now, David and I are friends, and we've interviewed Rob Stoner, who was the MD for Bob Dylan's Rolling Thunder Review, and he opines with us on film that Dylan had the idea to do this carnival type show way back when those two were playing with Ramblin' Jack Elliott before Dylan became a star. Rob Stoner and Bob Dylan go back that far. However, we see in the book, and you remind us, that Dylan and Leon did record together When I Paint My Masterpiece, and I forgot the other track. And I would, right, Watching the River Flow. Great, right. And I would have to think that that's kind of, you know, with the band and then doing Rolling Thunder that was so close together, that certainly Leon at least prodded him to finally do that. And it was more of it was more of a Mad Dogs than it was a carnival.
For sure. I mean, beyond that, Bob was rumored to be at the rehearsal for Mad Dogs and Englishmen at A&M, but he was certainly in at least one, but probably two. I shouldn't say in, but he was at two of the Fillmore. Well, yes. He was at the Fillmore show, one of the Fillmore nights for Mad Dogs, and he was up at the Port Chester night, I think.
Right.
Because people talk about Emily Smith, another local Tulsa legend. She spoke about
Sweet Emily
being at the, and they give a shout out to Dylan on the
on the record.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
So the book signing, yes, is April 15th. Or I'm so sorry, that's our Carney test.
That's tax day.
That's when you have to pay your taxes.
I know. I was like, I'm so obsessed with April 15th. Okay. So March 18th, Bill's flying in. And so, so people are so excited about this. We have them kind of spread throughout the day, and it's going to be right here at the church studio. And so we'll have wine and beer and champagne, and people get to walk around and look at our exhibits and our archive. We'll have docents on standby to do tours, and and meet and greet with the great Bill Janovitz. It's going to be
and you'll finally get a copy of your book.
Yeah, if I see if you can finagle one.
I'll finally get to try wine for the first time as well. So
there you go.
Thank you.